Yeah, so I thought today we would review the different command line tools that are part of the h5pyd package to use with HSDS. And first, let me share a link. So in this frequently asked questions, if you go down, there is, here, let me share my screen. So there are a few different tools that we provide. There's this HSinfo, HSLS, HSload, HSget, HSTouch, HSRM, HSMD, HSCP, HSDiff, HSAC. And many of these, I guess you can see, they're actually kind of HSDS versions of your typical Linux terminal commands, right? And it's kind of a different thing we have with HSDS versus the library, because, for example, if I wanted to remove an HDF5 file, well, I just use RM and the file name. But since with HSDS, the files are managed by a server, you don't have those directly visible to your operating system. So we have these analogs to those. So if you HSRM and a path, then you remove the object at that path. So that should make a bunch of sense. And then here, let me switch to a terminal.
Maybe in the meantime, a question would be, how do I get these tools? Can I download them separately somewhere, or?
Sure. Yeah. So if you do h5, if you do pip install h5pyd, you will get the package, and then all these tools are part of that package.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I did this share, and now I can't see how to unshare.
You're not sharing at the moment. You are.
Oh, it says stop share.
We see your camera at the moment.
Okay. Here. Who's share? Okay, I think I figured it out. Okay.
Here we go.
All right. So, can you guys see that clearly enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So here I am in my terminal, and one of my favorite commands is HSinfo, and this tells you the status of the server you're connected to. So you see I have service name, HSDS on dev1, server state's ready, the endpoint is this, my username, my password, my home folder, server version, node count, that's the number of containers running on the server, uptime, and h5pyd version. So you may ask, how does HSinfo know to connect to this endpoint, this hsds.hdf.test port 5101? Well, it's all managed by this file .hsconfig in your home directory. And since this is running on my notebook, I'll share with the world my secret hsconfig. It is just this text file that has h endpoint equals this, hs username, John, hs password, Charlie, hs API key. This API key is used for some setups where you don't have usernames and passwords, but you give it this key and use that key. Yeah. So if I wanted to talk to another server, say the HDF lab server, I would need to change this endpoint. But I can also just use this on the command line. So if I do hsinfo-help, it says if you use -e or -endpoint, to use this endpoint, and that overrides whatever you'd have in the hsconfig file. Okay, similarly, we have --user for username, --password for password, --API key, and so on. So if I do, I think this will work, hsinfo-e http. It doesn't like that because my password for my local account didn't match. But like here. Okay. So now with this -e, we are connecting to the HDF Lab HSDS instance. Okay. So many of these options are used for most of the different tools. So you get used to those. It should be pretty straightforward. Let me go back here. So let's try some of these tools out. HS Touch can be used to create either a folder or an HDF5 file. So if I do HS Touch /home/John, say CTD, call the doctor. We should have this folder now. Oh, actually, I already had that. Okay. So that folder. If I do agent list, okay, we have a folder of no items in it. So one thing that's different, I guess, for these tools versus your Linux command line is that I can't do things like this. Okay. So every path you provide in these tools has to be an absolute path. Right. So if I do, because there's no concept of a current directory on the server. So I can load a file. So let's take an HDF5 file and transcribe it onto the server. And now if we go back and list the contents of that folder, we see we have our new file. Okay, if I wanted to see the contents of the file, so HSLS is used both to list contents in the folder and to list items inside an HSDS domain. Okay. And then if I do -R, we see we go to the full hierarchy of that domain. Now, there's some other logging options that can be useful on occasion. If I do the same command and say log level debug, we see all these different log messages, right? And that could be useful if something's not going quite right. If I want to have that log go to a file instead of just to a screen, I can say log file my log.log. And then if I do this, we see the output of the log. There's another command, hsmove. So let's say we do hsmove home on cdd2. And again, I have to give the full absolute path to this. Okay. And if we see this, okay, so now this tall.h5 is from tall move.h5. Okay. Similarly, there's the hscp. Go back to this.
You have an extra L in there, in the source. Yeah, move the. Yeah.
Okay. And now we should have two files here. Okay. And there's another command, hsdiff, that is used to compare an HDF file with what has been uploaded to HSDS. So let's try this. If we do hsdiff tall.h5, so in true Linux style, if it doesn't do any output, it's identical. If you want to be a little more chatty, we have a verbose option. Okay, and here with the -v, it says in this domain, checking this group, getting this link, checking this attribute, and so on. Now I have I created two modified files. This tall attr mod is the same file, but with one of the values of one of the attributes changed. And if I do, let's go here. Okay. It says values for attribute 1 of the root group are different. One difference found. If I do hsdiff data mod, now this is one of the data sets had one of its values changed. Okay, and it says the value of the data set /G1/G1.1 data set 1.1 differ. And again, if we do the verbose option, it'll just go through as it's checking all the items. And then we can also retrieve a file from the server back to our local HDF file. So if I do HS sketch, then we get this tall moved by H5. Okay. Now there are some utilities that don't have an analog either with Linux command line utilities or with the HDF5 library tools. One of these is hsackle. So let's run that. If I say hsackle, we see this. And you say, what? You may be curious, what's an ACL? The ACL is used to define the permissions for a given domain or folder. So here you can have any number of ACLs associated with each domain. And here we have just one ACL. So the ACL username is John, and this create, read, update, delete, read ACL, update ACL says I have permissions to create new objects in that domain, to read objects in that domain, to modify objects in that domain, to delete objects in that domain, to read the ACL itself, and to modify the ACL. So basically, this username has full control over this file. If I wanted say GERD to have be able to maybe to read and to update, but not to delete or read the ACL or update the ACL, I can use the syntax plus RU. So a plus for the permissions you're adding, and R for read and U for update, and then username. So now if I just do the plain hsackle, there's Kurt who has these permissions, and me who has all permissions. If I wanted to say, oh, maybe it was a mistake giving him update permissions, so I can fix that by saying -u to remove the update permission. Okay, now there's still two ACLs, but he only has read permissions now, not update. So if you want to have kind of a default permission for anyone who's not otherwise listed in the ACL, you can use this default name. So if I say hsackle plus R default, and actually this E is, since I ran out of letters, it's for read ACL. If I say hsackle /home John CD2 tall H5 plus RE default, this means that anyone who's not John or Gerd will have these permissions, basically read, access, and able to read the ACL, but not to create or update or delete or update the ACL. Right? So I guess that's pretty much a run through of the different tools. Any questions?
What's the default without default?
The default without what?
Without default. So let's assume I haven't added that. What's sort of the implicit default, I guess?
Right. It's interesting. When we first set up HDF Lab, I had the default to be read. And there was, I guess, concerns, right? That if you want to have content viewable by others, you would need to take some positive action for that. So the safe thing to do is to have no global read access. And if I want global read access, the owner of that domain has to set that permission.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if there's no default ACL, then, and your user who's not in any of the ACLs, then you have no permissions. Right? Oh, there's one other thing in ACLs that was added fairly recently, and that's these group permissions. So you can say plus RUE, and you can define these groups with various mechanisms. And I say G devs, something like that. Okay. So this allows you to create a group, say devs, and add any users you have, and then apply that group username to avoid situations where like you have like a large set of people and you have to create many ACLs for each domain. All right. So I don't know, does that seem pretty easy to follow, or is it actually pretty confusing?
Easy.
Okay, good. So so I've been cleaning up these help texts. So if you do -H, you should get a fairly reasonable explanation of all the different options for this and for any tools.
Mm-hmm. If you go back to the ACLs, so I can set domain level ACLs, but can I also set object level ACLs?
You cannot. There was actually a feature we had in H5serve, the HDF's predecessor. There was like ACLs. You could set ACL per group or per data set. Mm-hmm. But it seemed like it was not used very much. And so we kind of just, you know, had the ACLs only apply at the domain level. Mm-hmm. Right. But you can imagine that being handy, say you had some kind of, you know, top secret data set that only special people could access within a domain.
Interesting, because in the past people ask for objects, for permissions for different objects. Especially in, I believe G were interested in that. I don't know if
they're interested in what?
There were at least 2 customers who were interested for HDF5, right? Not this new, but in general there was an interest. Maybe it should be more, you know, announced and you ask people, because in the past they did ask for permission for each object, grant permission. In different parts of the file, for example, you can give permission for the whole hierarchy or for just few objects.
And earlier you showed the h5diff example. Presumably, I mean, you compared a local the contents of a local file with an HSDS domain. Presumably, you can also compare 2 HSDS domains. But my question is, where does the comparison actually take place? I mean, in the case of domain to domain, presumably on the server or on the servers, can you actually compare HSDS domains across servers? And then in the case where I compare a local file to a domain, does the client actually, or is there some burden sharing going on, or how does that work?
So the actually you can do HSDiff across compare two different domains. So if it says HSDiff, compare an HDF file to a domain. So the first argument has to be a file, and the second argument has to be a domain. Yeah, it's kind of bugged me a bit that things like HS copy is somewhat. Okay. So HSDS copy an HSDS domain to a target. So it would seem better if the sources and targets were neutral as regards to, am I dealing with an HDF file on my local disk, or am I dealing with an HSDS domain on a server? But we're not quite there yet. So like you would think like HSLS, if you're given just a file, it would just do what h5ls does in the command line tool, right? There is something I didn't mention, that if you do need to distinguish a file path versus an HSDS domain, you can use this HDF5 : prefix. Like that.
And then presumably, I mean, that's of course a question on how you define HSDiff, because you could say, in the sense, how complete is your diff? Are you really trying to detect all differences, or do you kind of stop on the first difference you encounter, and then you are basically reporting back to the user and saying, okay, the two are different? And maybe that would make sense if you would offer to compare beyond just a local file and an endpoint, but then that's potentially an expensive proposition, and then you want the default to be as cheap as possible, and just to say, first difference encountered, let's just tell the user they are different, and if they want to make the time investment, then you can sort of have different levels of refinement of indicating what the differences might be.
Right. Yeah, I think any of these tools, there's a lot more that could be done potentially. I think basically we just need to listen to what people are asking for, because we can't do every possible thing. On the subject of knowing if something is changed, I did want to mention this. If you do HSInfo and a domain path, you'll see that there's this MD5 checksum. So this is kind of like a fast way to realize something in this domain got modified at some point. So the MD5 sum is basically a checksum over all the data sets and attributes and links of a domain. So if any value changes, your MD5 sum will be different.
That's interesting. So that's really like I forgot, like a Merkle tree, like that, or how did you implement that?
It's basically, it does well, if it's on S3, each sharded object has basically a MD5 tag associated with it. And I just create a list of all these tags and then do MD5 over those tags. So it's like a MD5 with MD5s. And similarly for POSIX files.
But you have sort of a canonical order, so to speak, in which you visit the in which you enumerate the participant checksums, so to speak. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, cool. Do we have any other questions over any topics?
Oh, just one more question on this. So did you say the checksum does or does not include timestamps? So if I move that domain, for example, does the checksum remain unchanged, or is the checksum going to change?
If you move a data set, it would change.
No. If I move the entire domain.
Oh, it should be the same.
Okay, so it does not include the timestamps. Yeah.
I don't. Here, let me see.
Which would be fine. I mean, I don't know how many people think about time as that important in this context. But yeah, so here we have timestamps.
But does John have timestamps in his presentation? Because Jason, it didn't have timestamp. Because
there's timestamps for every object. And yeah, so I think the checksum would change in that case. So let's.
So timestamp is part of the JSON file, right? It has. Okay.
Oh.
But if it's part of JSON file and you move, you're not rewriting JSON file, right?
If you move, you're not changing the JSON file. So a move operation on server is basically attaching that root group to a new name. If you copy, you're actually creating a whole new set of objects under the new root.
Okay, yeah, I can. That's homework for everybody who's interested to use HDF Lab, and then we can try and see under what circumstances the checksum changes. Good stuff.
All right, and Dana will be up next week since John and Dana just switched, and he might have other things to mention. And who knows what else. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll see you back here next week.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
See you.